Okay. You start?
They will switch once you start.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Najat Mokhtar, the Section Head of Nutrition. Welcome to the IEA. Welcome to the agency. I'm really happy to see you all here. This is great. We made it, finally. That's good. I have the great pleasure to introduce Mr. Mohammed Dawood, the Deputy Director General of the Department of Nuclear Application. Mr. Dawood, please.
Thank you, Najat. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the International Symposium on the Understanding Moderate Malnutrition in Children for Effective Intervention here in the IEA and in Vienna. The widespread perception of the IEA being only the world's nuclear watchdog does not do justice to the extensive activities in the other areas supporting the IEA mandate, and notably promoting the peaceful use of nuclear technology for health and development. And the other socio-economic sectors in non-power application are in agriculture, industry, water resources, and the environment. And in the field of human health, in addition to its critical role in the diagnosis and treatment of non-communicable disease, or NCD, among which cancer and cardiovascular disease, the IEA support capacity building in its member states in the use of stable tube techniques for the evaluation of nutrition intervention. And stable tube techniques have demonstrated added value, the evaluation of intervention that address malnutrition. And for example, the accurate assessment of body composition to determine the nature of weight gain, i.e. the lean body mass and fat body mass over time, can provide key information on the efficacy and effectiveness of the intervention, as well as for gauging the risk of chronic diseases. Through IEA support, more than 25 countries in Africa and 15 in Latin America and 12 in Asia have now had the capacity to use stable tube techniques to fight malnutrition. And the centers in Asia and Africa have been designated by the IEA to provide technical assistance and training within the region. You will hear more about the application of stable tube methods during this symposium. However, true IEA's expertise in that field is critical. It can only complement the work of other UN agencies, NGOs, and other major players in nutrition and health, and help fostering collaboration and partnership amongst those. Within that framework, the IEA, as a member of the UN Scaling Up Nutrition Network, or SUN, has supported 16 SUN countries in building the capacity to use stable tube techniques to better manage nutrition programs. The IEA is also a member of International Malnutrition Task Force, IMTF, an interagency advisory group on the management of severe acute malnutrition. It is within that context that the IEA associated itself with the World Food Programme, the Micronutrient Initiative, and Valid International to organize the international symposium you are attending today. Thanks to our partners for your support. The objective of this symposium is to provide a platform for all stakeholders to review the current knowledge and identify research gaps to improve the management of moderate acute malnutrition, or MAM, as well as to identify collaborations and partnerships in this area. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am glad to see that more than, well, at least this room is full, kindly, more than 450 participants from 85 countries have registered for this symposium. And I hope that this event will help strengthening cooperation between the participating institutions and agencies and create opportunities for further research and application for innovative approach to help alleviate moderate acute malnutrition, or MAM. And lastly, I wish you all a successful meeting and a pleasant stay in Vienna. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dawood. I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Aini Kwaku, the Deputy Director General of Technical Cooperation Department. He will address you at the end of this conference. Mr. Kwaku, thank you for coming. Following Mr. Dawood's speech, I thought you would like to know how the IEA came to be organizing this conference. During the last 2 to 3 years, we have realized together that recovering from malnutrition, or children recovering from malnutrition, not only they need to put on weight, but they need to put on the right sort of weight. The quality of weight gain is really important for healthy recovery from malnutrition. At various meetings, we have discussed the limitation of anthropometric tools as an indicator for body composition and also as tools to understand body composition. Measuring body composition accurately needs robust techniques. One of these is using stable isotopes, which are accurate, safe, and easy to use even at village level. Mr. Dawood pointed out that IEA is also an agency that fosters collaboration and partnership. And at various meetings, we have discussed the limitation, as I said, of anthropometric tools. And stable isotopes are really accurate and safe, and this is exactly what IEA can offer. Through several meetings, the issue of body composition was raised as a need to assess when malnourished children are taken care of. In considering what the IEA can offer, we were conscious that we didn't want to isolate this specific question from wider concerns about the management of moderate acute malnutrition. This led a number of us here to discuss the bigger picture of issues related to MAM management, which was the basis of this conference. You have in your conference pack this brochure, which is the IEA bulletin, and which goes into further details and gives you some specific examples on how stable isotope techniques can be applied in different contexts. One of such contexts is Morocco, and I would like to share with you this new film and share with you what has happened there.
With its geographical position, Mediterranean climate, and fertile lands, Morocco has all the right ingredients for a varied and healthy diet. The nation's cuisine is a colourful mixture of tradition and a little bit of theatre. Dishes like these take time to prepare, and time is what Moroccans in modern-day cities like Rabat don't have. People are coming to one of just a few authentic restaurants to get a taste of home cooking. Morocco is developing fast. As incomes improve and lifestyles change, so does the diet. This is leading to some major nutritional issues in this North African country, including obesity and nutrient deficiency. Based on the results of nationwide studies, the government decided to add vitamins and minerals to staple foods, a process known as fortification.
À peu près 37, même plus, des femmes, ils ont une carence, une anémie en rapport avec la carence en fer. Et il y a aussi le tiers des enfants, donc ils souffrent aussi d'une carence en vitamine A et vitamine D. Aussi pour ce qui est des carences en acide folique, il y a aussi des enfants et des femmes qui en souffrent.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, assists countries like Morocco to evaluate their nutrition programs. IAEA support is based on the use of nuclear techniques that use stable isotopes to find out what's happening in the body. Atoms of elements are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. The atoms that have a different number of neutrons are called isotopes. They can be unstable and emit radiation as they decay, or stable. Stable isotopes occur naturally in the environment, in our bodies, and our food. They pose no health risk and can be used for studies in people of all ages. Nutrition experts use synthetic stable isotopes. They're added to food or water at a higher level than they occur naturally in our bodies. Using spectrometry devices, they can be traced in samples of blood, urine or saliva. By analysing the isotopes, nutritionists can measure body composition, see how food is used and how the body functions. With this information, they can decide on the best way to treat malnourished people, evaluate progress and see if food fortification programs are really working. Children in particular are most at risk from malnutrition. They may look healthy, but deficiencies that aren't easily visible can seriously affect their development and leave them more vulnerable to disease. Vitamin A, for instance, is needed for children to grow and develop a strong immune system. But in Morocco, around 40% of children are deficient in this important vitamin. To address this problem, vitamin A was added to cooking oil, which was sold all over the country. Under a project supported by the IAEA, it was given to 100 breastfeeding mothers. They used this oil when cooking the family meals. The aim of the study was to measure the amount of vitamin A transferred from the mothers to their babies during breastfeeding.
J'ai participé au projet parce que je voulais essayer quelque chose de bénéfique pour mon bébé du moment que lui il passe dans le lait maternel, donc j'ai été assez contente de l'essayer.
At the Rabat Children's Hospital, the mothers were given a dose of water artificially enriched with deuterium. This is a stable isotope of hydrogen that occurs naturally in our body water. It mixed with the water in the mother's body, including her milk, which is nearly 90% water. Saliva samples were collected from the mothers and babies over a 2-week period. The samples were brought to the National Nutritional Research Institute in Rabat. The centre works closely with the IAEA and uses stable isotope methods for its research.
Les techniques linéaires donnent des informations beaucoup plus précises, ou disons plus précises, que les techniques conventionnelles ne peuvent pas nous fournir. Les techniques nucléaires permettent aussi d'évaluer des programmes nationaux de nutrition.
Under this project, the amount of deuterium in the samples was analysed. By measuring the disappearance rate of the isotope in the saliva of the mother and its appearance in the baby's saliva, the researchers could assess how much breast milk the baby had received. A further test showed how much vitamin A was in the milk. Its concentration in the milk from mothers who used the fortified oil was compared to the level in the milk of mothers who cooked with regular oil. Using the results of both tests, the scientists concluded that the babies of the mothers who used the fortified oil received more vitamin A than the ones whose mothers didn't consume it. Based on this information, the government decided to continue with oil fortification.
Pour nous, nutritionnistes au Maroc, ça a été vraiment une réussite à l'échelle nationale parce que du coup on a démontré au moins à travers l'étude qu'on a faite dans ce projet-là que la fortification est essentielle, que la supplémentation à elle seule n'est pas suffisante pour avoir un statut en vitamine A satisfaisant chez les bébés, bien que la femme prenne la vitamine A juste après l'accouchement. Donc ce n'est pas suffisant. La fortification par contre permet d'avoir des statuts suffisants en vitamine A chez les bébés et ceci est très essentiel.
Now Morocco is tackling another major health issue, anemia, caused by a lack of iron. Almost half of the country's pregnant women suffer from this condition, and over a third of Moroccan children. Anemia can increase the risk of premature births. In children, it can impair physical and mental development. Bread is one of the main components of the Moroccan diet. It's eaten with all meals at any time of the day. It's filling, tasty, affordable, and predominantly white. A project is now underway to tackle anemia by adding synthetic iron to flour. The Atlantic Mill in Casablanca is one of several mills nationwide that are taking part in this fortification scheme. Fortified flour is distributed to bakeries all over the country, where it's used to make bread and biscuits. Morocco will use stable isotope techniques to evaluate if this project is effective. Nutrition is a lifelong issue. The IAEA will continue to support countries like Morocco so that babies like this one can grow into healthy adults.
I hope this film has given you an idea about what we do. Outside this room, there is an exhibit where you can find more information, particularly on the assessment of breast milk intake and body composition. Please feel free to ask any of the team if you need more information. Now I have the pleasure to introduce our 3 partner agencies that have been involved from the beginning in designing and planning this conference: Valid International, Micronutrient Initiative, and the World Food Programme. First of all, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Paluku Bawere, Research Programme Coordinator from Valid International. Mr. Steve Collins could not make it today to be with us, and he was sending his sincere apologies to all of you. Paluku?
Good afternoon. So on behalf of Steve Collins and the All Valid International team, we also welcome you here, and we really want to say that it was it's a very important meeting for us. When we were invited to be part of the people organizing this meeting, we quickly respond positively, because this is a type of meeting we're looking for all the past years. When Valid started his operation in 1999 and developing the CTC approach, community therapeutic care, now called MAM, or community-based management of acute malnutrition, it was focusing on trying to improve the management to 3 key elements: improving the operational delivery, finding or contributing to developing products that are really efficacious, and trying to make sure that all program targeting malnutrition had an element of impact assessment. Why it was very important to consider the problem of operational delivery? Because we know that even if we have a good solution, if that solution is not reaching the targeted population, then we are not going to have impact. So the focus on how the intervention has to be delivered, how we can address barrier to access, and how we can boost all the facilitators to access, was key in the development of CMAM, and is continuing to be one of the areas Valid try to work on to try to improve the management and the prevention of acute malnutrition. You can have a product that is efficacious. You can have it, but if it is not reaching the target population, if people are not using it in a proper way, it will not be contributing to solving the problem. But also, if this product is not really rooted into the natural context where these children are, it also not contribute in, for example, in the prevention. The aim of Valid International has always been to try to integrate the production of the product into local agriculture, to make sure that this product is not seen as only something coming from outside, but it's also contributing to building knowledge of people in that community, and also is well integrated in local agriculture to make sure that you integrate prevention and treatment. Most of the time, from the experience, Valid, the director of Valid, when they started Valid, from their previous experiences, it was that sometimes organization was focusing on only ticking boxes. We have done it without really trying to know if what they have been doing, it has been having an impact. That's why from the start, the third element of Valid operation was to integrate impact assessment through all the coverage survey into all the program they were supporting. 4 principles were preceding all the work Valid are doing. 1, you have to go for evidence-based approaches or intervention. The intervention that we are proposing has to be practical, scalable, and has to be integrated in an environment that both the public sector and the private sector can work hand in hand to try to deliver the services for the good of our children. it is needed to have an evidence-based approach, an intervention, an evidence-based treatment, because if we can, the effort we invest in trying to make this program reach the target population is enormous. If we do that with a product, with an intervention which we are not having evidence that it is going to work, it's just waste of energy, resources, and sometimes time, because when we think that we are intervening, we are implementing something which is not actually effective, we are losing time to look for the good solution. We can have a good intervention, but if we cannot practically implement it because it is too complex, because it cannot reach some areas, we think that also it's very, very difficult to have an impact. Every time when Violet think about a solution, about a program, the idea of impact is always there to make sure that we don't have only as criteria for assessing the effectiveness of our activity in terms of clinical element, but also impact at population level. The difficulty sometimes has been we can get a good technical solution for a problem, but if that problem is not scalable, it is require a lot of high-level resources or people. That solution also cannot be can contribute well on the impact at population level. That's why we always try to have, when we are working an element, to have to think about, is this intervention that we want to propose scalable? Is this proposal can reach the very remote area? We know for malnutrition, unfortunately, most of the children we want to get in the program are sometimes in a remote area. We have done well, Valid and all the partners and all the people in that room in terms of management of severe acute malnutrition. We are still having effort to do regarding the management and the prevention of moderate acute malnutrition. We want the way things have to go, has to follow this area. Valid is still doing some research. It's trying to do to look for solutions for improving this, following all these three elements I mentioned before. In terms of operation delivery, the question has been to see how we can change the way MAM is managed today, services for MAM is delivered today, to make them scalable. How can they be more cost effective? How this intervention can take into account the know-how of the private sector to integrate it with the know-how of the public sector, and how we can integrate more and more the prevention of MAM with the broader efforts to prevent chronic malnutrition. That's the area Valid is trying to work on, the operational area delivery. And on another area is about product development. How can we identify cheaper products? How can we make sure that the product, because here it is a management that takes more longer than for some, we target at the same time with that say the same product, MAM and chronic malnutrition. How we can better use the ingredients that are grown locally to develop this product that can be used for the management of MAM. On the impact side, effort has made to try to develop new surveys that can assess the impact of all the intervention, not only in terms of how many children are reached, but integrating other new indicators that can give a broader picture of what is happening at individual level and at population level. This meeting is exactly very, very important for us because, as you know, it is not very easy for a small organization led by the International to cover all these areas. That's why when the agenda was developed, we saw a lot of areas that can inform valid work in terms of developing the product, in terms of the identification, better identification or targeting of children, and how we can deliver better. So we are really looking forward to learn from all people from this audience will be presenting all the different sessions so that we can boost our agenda and improve our own work, benefiting from all the knowledge that are in this audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paluku. Now I would like to introduce Linda Case, the head of the nutrition section at the World Food Programme.
Thank you very much. On behalf of WFP, I'd like to welcome you as well to the meeting this afternoon and for the next few days. I'm very pleased to see such great attendance. It signals, I guess, or reflects that this is an important meeting, and it reflects also the need that we have to review, consolidate, and plan the thinking around moderate acute malnutrition for the future. As you all know, nutrition is changing very rapidly. It's exciting to have this global and national commitment to a subject, to a topic, especially for many of us that have been working in the field for many years and have been struggling to put nutrition high on the agenda. Now we have, I think, a major opportunity to work in nutrition. But it can also be challenging at times to be consistent and up to date with the new evidence and learning. Because every week there's new papers coming out, every few years there's a synthesis of different papers coming out, and we have to translate that into guidance and discussions at country level, but also within our organizations. But it can also be equally challenging to work in the absence of substantive evidence on all aspects of a problem. And I think many of us that have been working in the field of moderate acute malnutrition for some time feel a little bit of that when we talk about this area. We've been working with less evidence than what we would like, but we're faced often with having children suffering with moderate acute malnutrition or at risk of becoming acutely malnourished and need to act. But we're often struggling with acting in absence of probably as much evidence as what we would like. I think that this meeting actually, if we look at it as a start, as a beginning, there have been attempts in the past, but we have to really think of this as just a start. This is not just a meeting where we're going to discuss and present evidence, and then we're going to move forward and we won't come back again to continually reevaluate the evidence, because new evidence will be coming in, we'll identify gaps, we'll need to review again new evidence, and we'll need to continue to think about how do we move forward talking about the important issue of moderate acute malnutrition. I think there have been challenges and questions about supplementary feeding programs and the treatment and prevention of moderate acute malnutrition from almost the start of the intervention in the 60s and the 70s. As a graduate student at Hopkins, one of the first papers that I had was George Beaton's paper where he reviewed supplementary feeding. And that review has been followed by a number of other reviews identifying some of the challenges to treating and preventing moderate acute malnutrition. But there are still many, many questions, despite a number of attempts to better understand moderate acute malnutrition. There are many questions that we still need to solve. And as you'll see from the agenda, those questions range from basic science and understanding better biology to looking at food formulations. It includes also thinking about food safety. It also is looking at nutrition governance. And that's not even beginning to talk about programming options and the evidence for those different options. And then talking about, as Paluku mentioned, what do we know about how to deliver the interventions and how can we break down some of the barriers and the constraints that we have to implementing interventions well. And then we talk about policy as well. So there's this very wide range of issues that we still need to discuss and to tackle. And I think, again, this meeting provides a really important opportunity to tackle these outstanding issues, or at least to begin to understand what we know, what we don't know, and what's the plan for moving forward. We often hear this statement, WFP is the lead UN agency on MAM, UNICEF is the lead UN agency on SAM, WHO is providing standards and guidance. There's often this division of what different UN agencies, what the role is of different UN agencies. We have memorandums of understandings between WFP and UNICEF and between WFP and UNHCR Those were developed largely building on agency strengths and comparative advantage, but they're also obviously a reflection of history. But the division of labor can actually be helpful sometimes in planning. It can be helpful at a country level to understand who's going to be able to contribute certain support to national governments. But I think we all recognize that there's a great need for better coordination on community-based management of acute malnutrition. The Scaling Up Nutrition has set a standard of coordination by establishing governments as the central to addressing nutrition, and then also identifying different networks, UN networks, civil society networks, private sector networks as well. And I think we can build on this mechanism to strengthen our collaboration around CMAM. We also have the model of UNAIDS, where there are 11 different UN partners that have come together to address HIV and AIDS, and we can also look at how we could potentially build off of this. I think we've started to make progress over the last couple of years, but definitely more needs to be done, and we need to identify concrete joint goals, so that we're not just talking about working together, but that we're actually working together, so that we don't have separate roles and responsibilities, but that we have joint mandates and joint targeted goals. I think we'll talk throughout the next few days about the need for intersectoral responses to undernutrition and to moderate acute malnutrition in particular. Children with acute malnutrition, or those that are at risk, need access to health services. They need clean water and sanitation. They need good feeding and caring practices, and they also need access to the essential nutrients that they need to grow and develop, just like any other child. But I think it's really important for us to recognize that this is not new. This is what we've been discussing about nutrition for many, many years. And so what we need to also think about is how do we move forward with doing this? How do we work with the Scaling Up Initiative, and how do we work more collaboratively together to ensure that interventions are happening in parallel in the countries in our own countries and countries where we're working. WFP is actually committed to support efforts to prevent and treat acute malnutrition, and in meeting the nutrient requirements of malnourished children, as well as during the first 1,000 days from conception until the child's second birthday. And I think we come to this meeting with a very open mind in terms of learning, and in ways that we can contribute as well as to share and as well as to move forward in how we address programming going forward. The development of this meeting has been very consultative and participatory, and we look forward to very participatory and consultative discussions over the next few days. A large share of the children that are affected by moderate acute malnutrition still don't have access to treatment and prevention. And so if we can, during this meeting, review the current evidence, build consensus around what we do, and then maybe at least try to set and hopefully clarify some aims for what we really do want to achieve in this area, will make a major step forward. And I think we owe it, at least I personally feel I owe it to all the WFP staff that are in Central African Republic, in Cameroon, in South Sudan, and in other countries right now in the middle of serious crises or just going about their daily work, to use this opportunity and to use this meeting to build consensus and to move forward with moderate acute malnutrition. Thank you.
I have the pleasure to introduce Saskia Ozendar, Senior Technical Advisor at the Micronutrient Initiative. Saskia.
Thank you. On behalf of the Micronutrient Initiative, I would like to welcome you all and would like to thank the International Atomic Energy Agency for taking the lead in organizing this important and timely conference. The Micronutrient Initiative, or MI, is a global nutrition organization working to eliminate hidden hunger in the most vulnerable populations. Traditionally, MI has been active in strengthening and integrating delivery platforms for micronutrients and other health interventions, particularly focusing on vitamin A supplementation, salt and flour fortification, iron and folic acid, and zinc for diarrhea. For instance, since 1997, MI has provided more than 8 billion vitamin A supplements. Recently, however, MI has started to expand its activities towards bringing micronutrients to pregnant women and young children to improve women's and newborns' health and survival, and to increase the number of children with a healthy growth and development. MI's programs on infant and young child nutrition focus on delivering a continuum of care to the communities, ensuring both prevention as well as management of moderate acute malnutrition, and reach the vulnerable children before they slip further into crisis. This year, MI's new president, Mr. Joel Spicer, joined the organization, and under his leadership, MI is even more committed to think holistically about how we address malnutrition among the women and children we reach. So that means we are all charged to think more creatively about critical intersections for intervention and innovation. We may be a new kid on the block in the management of moderate acute malnutrition, but we think we have a lot to offer to the field with a long-standing recognition in strengthening health systems in order to bring micronutrient solutions to those in need, and with a strong and growing technical expertise team committed to develop cost-effective, evidence-informed innovations and test and especially evaluate them for practical use in scale-up programs while using rigorous methods. We know that we are not alone in this arena, you're all here, and MI's interventions and approaches can contribute significantly, but only if they are linked to efforts of others in the sector, so that we are adding value to each other's work. And that's why this conference is so critical to us, and that's why we were so interested to join in the organization of this conference, because we are keen to learn the latest scientific insights on the management and especially also the prevention of moderate acute malnutrition, and because we want to seize the opportunity to reach out to you, to make connections and link up to ensure that fewer children fall through the cracks. So I wish you all a good conference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Saskia. While waiting for Mr. Nabarro to be connected with us, he's in Stockholm right now, and in a few minutes we will have his presentation. So I open the floor. If you have any comment or questions, please take this opportunity to ask.
I'm Jocelyn Maron from AET. I would like to know if you already use stable isotope to measure malnutrition in moderate cases, please. Thank you. Moderate malnutrition, if you already use stable isotope to measure.
We use stable isotope in the case of moderate malnutrition to assess, as I said, the body composition and following. We had a research project with, I think, 5 to 6 centers following, it's not moderate, but it's some children, severe acute, for 2 years, following those kids and measuring body composition. And this was the start where we start thinking about this conference, because we start seeing that to measure body composition, we need to first start developing standards for body composition. And this is what started with, this is the thinking that we start with WHO, where now we are starting a collaborating project involving 5 centers where we are developing the standards for body composition up to 2 years. And the aim is to use those standards when we are following the kids with acute malnutrition, because we know that severe acute malnutrition affects not only the body composition but the entire metabolism, and this affects also the measurement of body composition. Particularly, you know that body composition measurement is based on the measurement of total body water, and to have total body water stable, we need certain stage to get those kids, stage of recovery, to start measuring body composition. So the answer is yes. We are now developing standards for body composition, and we are now working also on malnutrition following few kids measuring body composition. Okay, we have here David connected. Can we?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So it's an enormous pleasure and privilege to now introduce Mr. David Nabarro, the coordination of Scaling Up Nutrition movement, who has done so much in championing and leading the international effort in nutrition. David, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much and for making it possible for me to interact with you all, and in particular, Najat, for the invitation to be here. I'd like to apologize personally to you and to all participants for the fact that I'm not physically in Vienna. Why not, you might ask? The answer is that I had a pretty monster operation on my back recently, and I have really had to cut down the amount of travelling that I do just for a short period. I'll return, I think, to normal business shortly, but just right now I'm still in recovery phase. And so to Najat, Mokhtar, to Daud Mohammed, and to other colleagues, I'd like to say hello. I'd also like to say hello to colleagues from Valid International, Paluku Bawere, Micronutrient Initiative, Saskia Ozendarp, and Linda Kais of the World Food Programme. Delighted that you are all here, and also that I've got a chance to see you, because I've got a really good position. I'm looking up at the panel. I'm pleased that there are 5 focal points from countries in the Scale Up Nutrition movement present, from Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Haiti, Namibia, and the United Republic of Tanzania, and also that there is a minister participating from another sun country, Guatemala. I'm particularly delighted that my colleague Emon is with you all. Emon has been closely involved in the work of IAEA, but has also been one of the facilitators of the Sun Movement Country Network, and indeed was behind the original design of the Sun Movement, and has taught me so much. Emon, I don't know where you are, but it's great that you're there in the room. I understand that Professor Bhutta from Aga Khan in Pakistan, one of the authors of Lancet Special Series on Maternal and Child Nutrition 2013, is there. If you are present, Professor Bhutta, Zulika Bhutta, I am so pleased. And also that there are many colleagues from the United Nations, from NGOs and from the academe, also some private sector friends have joined. It's a really fantastic turnout. I'd like to express gratitude to the governments who've made possible such a fantastic participation in this enormously important meeting. What I'd like to do during the next few minutes is to tell you a little bit about my own work in nutrition over the last 35 years, a bit about who I am, because I know there are some who don't know me very well. I'd then like to talk a bit about the movement for scaling up nutrition itself. I'd like to give a fairly detailed description of how this movement has evolved in the last 3.5 years. And then I'd like to look ahead, the Sun Movement 2014 to 2015. I'm going to then dive down into the subject of your meeting, and particularly your focus on moderate acute malnutrition, and indicate to you my own view as to why this is particularly important. I'm going to attempt to limit the duration of my remarks so that there will be space for us to interact, and to that end I hope that you will have your questions and remarks ready. And because of the way the Sun Movement has evolved as a totally organic structure with a number of countries, but also many hundreds, indeed thousands of other actors participating, I usually find that it's the exchanges and the dialogue that really helps us to move forward. So let me just give you my own personal background. I'm a medical doctor, and shortly after I qualified and began working as a specialist in child health, I worked in Southeast Asia with Save the Children, initially as a child health officer in a district in eastern Nepal, and then as the regional coordinator for Southeast Asia. I'm talking about a period between 1976 and 1985, around the time when I was also learning professional nutrition and found myself interacting with Professor John Waterlow and colleagues at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And that's why when Jack was just talking now about some of the uses of IAEA techniques, it took me back to those days when John Waterlow was teaching me about some of the metabolic aspects of nutrition at that time. But it was my work in eastern Nepal during the late 1970s that convinced me about the importance of good nutrition for ensuring child health and development. I used to work intensively in a small number of villages just south of the market town of Jankuta. In those villages, we would meet with households about once a month, and we would learn how the parents expected children to lose weight at certain times of the year due to disease, due to shortages of high energy and high nutrient foods, and due to immense pressure on women because their demands on their time in the fields and in other places were enormous. And what also seemed to be the case was that the children who tended to lose most weight during the difficult months also seemed to have the greatest difficulty with gaining in height during the months of the year after harvest, when the weather improved, disease incidence fell, when most height gain tended to occur in children. It was sort of bunched. Height gain came over about 4 months in the year. But if you went into the good months with a really bad situation associated with weight loss, then the height gain just didn't happen. And so what we saw in these communities was there was an immensely close relationship between wasting or weight loss and subsequent reduction in height gain, which tended to lead to the diagnosis of stunting. And so that got me particularly interested in the possibilities for tackling moderate malnutrition during the difficult months as a way to try to reduce the likelihood that children would subsequently become stunted. And of course, along with others, we were seeing plenty of evidence that children who were stunted just did not do so well in school and seemed to have a number of other challenges, particularly increased incidence of severe disease when they were encountering causes of gastrointestinal upset and so on. Of course, at that time, to get communities, medical personnel and others interested in moderate malnutrition was really difficult. If children could be weighed or if arm circumference could be measured, then moderate malnutrition could be made visible. But for most communities, this tendency towards weight loss and then subsequent slowed height gain on a kind of annual basis was what people thought was just the natural order of things, and it was really only as a result of intense dialogue with community leaders and others that it was possible to share the reality that this wasn't good for children. It did have long-term impacts on their health, on their intellectual development, on their physical development. And that's why, ever since, I've remained convinced that one of the vital requirements of everybody involved in healthcare and child development is to focus on moderate malnutrition, particularly moderate malnutrition that comes seasonally. So the statistics are clear, and I'm sure you've already discussed them, that really moderate malnutrition is associated with a raised risk of death in childhood and as well with other subsequent disadvantages in the child's development. And that's why I believe what you're doing today is so important. Severe acute malnutrition and moderate acute malnutrition together, affecting somewhere in the region of 52 million children across the world. That's 1 in 12 children under 5. An enormous toll for their health and well-being. The numbers are not reducing, certainly not within sub-Saharan Africa, but also not among poor communities in Asia and in Latin America. And in fact, the percentage of children affected by moderate malnutrition will need to decrease very rapidly if it is going to be possible for the world to achieve the target that was agreed in 2012 at the World Health Assembly for reducing childhood wasting to less than 5% by 2025. So that's a bit of personal background, just to add a couple more comments. I continued to work as a medical doctor until 2008 in various different roles, firstly teaching, and then with the British government, then with the World Health Organization, and then most recently in the United Nations with Kofi Annan when he was Secretary General. Under the current Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, my responsibilities have shifted a bit to working on food security, and then more recently he asked me to take on some responsibilities for nutrition. And it was in 2010 that I was involved in trying to find ways to get better joint working by different organizations and stakeholders to address malnutrition at a time when there was a lot of concern about whether or not our institutions are doing the job as well as they could. And if you remember, in 2008, the first Lancet special series on maternal and child nutrition came out with some very strong criticism of the international system for its work on malnutrition. Personally, I think that that was kind of tough, because the reality is that malnutrition is caused by so many different factors that it's often very difficult to identify one or two simple paths through which nutrition can be improved. And so, as we've seen with many other development issues, when there are multiple causes, we get multiple groups interested in a response. And bringing those groups together so that their response can be made as effective as possible is just not that easy. And that was why when, in 2010, a group of people came together to consider how they could better address malnutrition, the idea emerged of making a real virtue out of working together. And that's why we started to talk about a movement for nutrition as a way of describing how many different actors will make a virtue out of working together and work hard to address all forms of malnutrition. What is it about the movement that perhaps makes it unique? Firstly, it really does address all forms of malnutrition. Secondly, the countries are at the forefront in the Sun movement. And if they decide that they're going to prioritize certain aspects of malnutrition, that's their choice. There's nobody outside saying, please do this or please do that. The movement responds to country priorities. And increasingly countries are saying we do want to address all forms of malnutrition, including forms of malnutrition associated with obesity and in some cases diet-related non-communicable diseases. Thirdly, most of those who are involved in the Sun movement are saying we will adopt multi-sectoral approaches with a focus on preventing malnutrition, and if we can't prevent it, with a focus on treating malnutrition. And by multi-sectoral approaches, I mean linking what happens in food and agriculture, in water and sanitation, health, education, employment, women's affairs, social protection, humanitarian response, and sometimes also other sectors that perhaps are less commonly considered, like, for example, tourism, or even like environmental development. There are some who say that malnutrition should cut across all sectors of development. A fourth aspect of the countries in the Sun movement is they tend to engage a full range of stakeholders: governments, civil society, farmers' groups and consumers, businesses, scientists, the United Nations family, donor agencies. And indeed, the idea is that the Sun movement is like a big tent in which everybody is welcome, provided that they are acting responsibly, provided that they are committed to working together, and provided that they don't demonstrate any challenging conflict of interest. The Sun movement works at all levels. It works at community level, district level, regional level, national level, and then continentally and globally. The idea being that there is no effort at any time to suggest that actions at any one level are somehow superior to the actions at another level, but as I've already said, within the movement, what countries decide to do and how they do it is right at the centre. And of course, by coming together and working together for improved nutrition, within the Sun movement, we are focusing all the time on the achievement of results. Launched in 2010, I have to stress, the movement is not a fund, it's not an institution, it's not an organisation, it's not a new United Nations agency. Instead, it's about trying to make certain that the political commitments for improving nutrition are stronger, and that then within that political space, everybody concerned is working together as effectively as they can. Again, it's about a big tent within which everybody is working together, moving towards a common goal, and at the same time trying to reinforce each other's efforts so that nobody feels isolated, everybody feels part of this effort to advance action for nutrition. And the movement was launched in New York in September 2010, and now here we are in May 2014. There are 52 countries in the movement. A week ago I would have said 50, but I'm very pleased to announce that over the last week, Philippines and Somalia have asked to join the movement, and they are incredibly welcome. There's also one state in India that participates in the movement, the state of Maharashtra. They are a partner in the Sun movement, and I'm hopeful that there will be more Indian states who take part as well. Now, the countries, as I've said, are at the centre of the movement, but the efforts of the governments of these countries are supported by 4 global networks: the donor network, civil society network, United Nations system network, of which IAEA is a member, and the business network. I think that we will probably see more networks evolve. There's likely to be some form of scientist network, and also a form of network involving professional nutritionists. Again, because of the organic nature of the movement, it won't be for anybody to prescribe how these evolve. I just think that they are going to appear, possibly regionally, and then eventually globally. The whole movement is guided by a lead group of 28 people, selected by the United Nations Secretary General, initially appointed in 2012 and just recently reappointed. I'm delighted because that gives continuity, and the lead group is chaired by the Executive Director of UNICEF, Anthony Lake, on behalf of the UN Secretary General. There are 4 ways in which governments are advancing their work once they come into the Sun movement. Each of them does it slightly differently, but these patterns are now emerging pretty consistently across all countries. The first is bringing people together to work effectively through functioning multi-stakeholder platforms. Of course, in some countries these platforms are referred to as committees or task forces. In other countries they are referred to as the National Nutrition Platform or the National Nutrition Organization. But the idea of talking and thinking about multi-stakeholder platforms is to stress straight away that it is about joint working. Secondly, governments in some countries put increasing emphasis on establishing policies and laws that provide a coherent policy and legal framework for nutrition. Now this is absolutely vital, because unless the government itself is able to put policy making on nutrition at a very high level, it makes it very difficult for all the different stakeholders to know where they stand and to work together. Thirdly, the countries in the Sun movement are now finding ways to implement activities within different sectors, aligning them around a single set of expected results, and agreeing what those results will be, calling it a common results framework. Now, this business of bringing together the efforts of different sectors, aligning them and agreeing common results is not straightforward. It, as all of you in the audience knows, can take a lot of time, can be very frustrating, but to establish common results across sectors is absolutely critical when you're dealing with an issue that has so many causes. And I'm delighted to say that the majority of some countries have put huge efforts, particularly in recent months, into establishing their common results framework. And then the fourth process is increasing the available resources from domestic budgets and supplementing them with external assistance so as to ramp up or scale up efforts for nutrition and to demonstrate achievement. So once again, these 4 processes are firstly to bring people together on multi-stakeholder platforms. Secondly, establishing policies and laws that create a coherent policy and legal framework. Thirdly, implementing and aligning activities within different sectors around common results frameworks. And then fourthly, increasing the available resources from domestic sources and then supplementing them with external resources and demonstrating the results that are achieved with these investments. Now, how has the Sun movement evolved in the last year? For me, the most significant event in 2014 was the Sun Global Gathering in September that year in New York. Somewhere in the region of 300 people, many of them from Sun countries, but also from the different networks coming together. And what they said very clearly in that meeting was, yes, we're delighted with the new political impetus. We're delighted that there have been global summits about nutrition in 2014 where government leaders have made commitments. But we need a lot of help to build capacities within our own countries if we're really going to succeed in responding to the political impetus from our leaders. How can the Sun movement help us to do this? And it was a really strong expression of need, and it wasn't done in any kind of pushy way. All that the people from Sun countries were saying was that it's not easy when the President or the Prime Minister is telling us to do more, to achieve more. Could you please help us to have the capacity to do this? And that meant that within the Sun movement The focus shifted in 2014 to capacity building, to making certain that there are the capacities in countries to do this work. Firstly, it's countries learning from each other. And just right now, there are people from some countries who've gone on a visit to a country that is offering on-the-spot training, Senegal, through what's called learning routes to learn how Senegal is doing it. Somewhere in the region of 35 professionals are participating, and it's going to be, I think, an extremely interesting experience for them. We've got another learning route coming up in Peru a bit later this year, and there will be more towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, so that countries can learn from each other on the spot. And then another way in which learning is taking place is through the creation of communities of practice, so that countries can access experience and expertise, especially for multi-sectoral working. There are 4 communities of practice now under formation. One of them is on planning, costing, implementing and mobilizing funds, and is in particular looking at ways of developing costed national plans, and at the same time of trying to put a cost on multi-sectoral working, what we sometimes call nutrition-sensitive strategies in different sectors. The second community of practice is on social mobilization, advocacy and communications, looking very hard at how to identify different audiences and work with them on specific content so that those audiences will change the way in which they think and act. Important for parliamentarians, important for programme workers, important for community leaders, important for community citizens to understand a little bit more about nutrition, in an area where I know many some countries want to do more and again want to learn from each other, particularly focusing on the 1,000 days between start of pregnancy and a child's second birthday. A third community of practice has emerged on tracking implementation, monitoring progress and evaluating impact. And several of the networks, including particularly the donor network and the UN network, have already come forward and offered countries with additional expertise so that they can better monitor progress, better demonstrate their results. The European Union is taking a particular lead on this, and I'm pleased to say that I'm hoping to have further discussions with them very shortly, because I think they, together with Canada and other countries, have understood that countries really do need help to build their existing information systems so that they can provide what's needed for nutrition. And then fourthly, I think many countries have said we really do need more skills for managing multi-sectoral action at the community level and district level. And we need to have better skills at doing this with multiple stakeholders, bringing together our civil society groups with our scientists and finding ways to involve lots of different stakeholders in ways that avoid conflicts of interest, or if conflicts of interest do occur, manage those conflicts of interest so they don't create difficulty. These are 4 communities of practice. They've emerged since our global gathering in September last year. They're coming and flourishing, and they're showing the value of countries at the centre, because it's often the country people themselves who are at the centre of these communities of practice, sharing with each other and identifying very precisely the kind of expertise that they want from universities, from consultancy groups, or from other sources. I would like to again thank my colleague Emun. I hope I'm not singling you out too much for your personal involvement in the building of this approach to working and putting countries so much at the centre. Because all of us know that to get good work across different sectors, whether it's the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Social Protection, or whatever they're called in your countries, getting these different groups to talk together, to focus on how their activities are influencing nutrition is not easy. And the capacities needed in country are quite sophisticated. Of course, what I'm also realizing is that it's sometimes really useful to come together and just to share frustrations as well as to share successes, because these frustrations often are associated with enormous success over several months, and then you have an election or you have a change of minister, and suddenly what appeared to be really good cooperation between different sectors overnight can become a difficult challenge. And so a lot of the communities of practice are about sharing real life experiences which occur when you're doing this kind of nutrition work. It's a bit different from what happens in the scientific laboratory. It's the challenge of working in a political context where you don't always control the way in which things are going to go, and it's terribly important that we support each other in these different settings. And it's through regional meetings, global events, opportunities for sharing experiences that we are able to back each other up and to learn. And I get hugely stimulated by this. I'm in a very privileged position in that every 2 months I'm able to talk with the government focal points from some countries. It requires 9 different telephone calls because there are so many countries across different time zones, and we have 3 in French, 1 in Spanish and the rest in English, and indeed sometimes things go very wrong and we have to have follow-up calls individually because the phone lines break down. But it's through 2 monthly phone calls and listening to your experiences that I'm able to understand just what a lot is happening. If I look ahead, is this way of working achieving good results? Is it going to continue? What form is it going to take? Well, I absolutely am convinced that regular exchanges between countries on how they tackle challenges associated with malnutrition will have to continue in some form or other. I'm also convinced that the communities of practice that are now coming to life are changing the way in which countries are accessing capacity building expertise. I'm convinced that the networks that have come together through the Sun movement are strong, but I appreciate that there are some who feel that they perhaps have not delivered according to their promise. I'm delighted though that so many of the people in the networks are now really looking hard at how they can contribute more, and we're seeing real efforts to reorganise the UN network, the business network, the donor network, and the civil society network as we speak. There are some who question whether the lead group with its 27 members is strong enough as a governance body, and let's see what happens. Our secretariat with 18 people is quite heavily stretched, and there are some who wonder whether it's big enough for the job. So during 2014 there will be an independent comprehensive evaluation of the movement, be a chance for everybody who's had anything to do with it and those who don't to have their say on whether or not it's the right way to be working, and also whether or not a structure like the movement should continue or whether we should revert back perhaps to a more normal intergovernmental or interagency programme or do something completely different. This independent comprehensive evaluation will start in June and will continue till the end of December. All Sun countries are going to be asked to contribute to it, and by next year there will be a new process to visioning about the Sun movement. Now, moderate acute malnutrition is of major concern to everybody within the Sun movement, and in particular it's looking at ways to try to prevent and respond to wasting. Most Sun countries have adopted or are in the process of adopting goals that relate to the World Health Assembly targets, including wasting, and translating the goals into action means that countries are integrating their specific interventions, the kind that you'll be discussing in the various sessions over the next few days, into overall programmes to address moderate acute malnutrition or wasting. And I'm very keen that you do find ways to widen the span of attention beyond severe acute malnutrition towards moderate acute malnutrition, so that we can increase the focus on preventing the numbers of children who develop SAM and who need therapeutic feeding. I'm delighted, for example, with the experiences of Ethiopia, which has expanded its interventions to reduce SAM and is now thinking very hard about how to bring MAM, or moderate acute malnutrition, into the picture. I don't want colleagues to believe that there is any reason to neglect moderate acute malnutrition. It's difficult because it's less visible, but it's important because if you can prevent children becoming severely malnourished, You prevent so many expensive treatments being necessary, but also you reduce the risk that they're going to be adversely affected long term by the impact of malnutrition. And so MAM does require a multi-sectoral approach, does require multiple partners. There is no magic bullet, but the kinds of things that you're discussing over these days in your meeting, particularly looking at the different reasons why children become malnourished, and then to investigate causality and respond to it, is really exciting. I've been working in particular looking at some of the experiences of colleagues in Sri Lanka, where village level officials from the Ministries of Health, Agriculture, Economic Development, Child Development and Women's Affairs have been working together to look at the causes of nutrition vulnerability in different households, and then tailoring their responses to the research that examined the different causes. And what's great is when it's possible to take the idea of investigating cause and move it beyond the research community and make it part of routine programming, so that it becomes possible for field personnel to distinguish between whether the moderate malnutrition is as a result of a health problem, or an issue related to mother's time, or an issue related to access to food, or an issue related to some other challenges in the household or in the community. That's when it all becomes really excellent and useful, and I hope that one of the real outcomes of your meeting will be to find ways to help those who are implementing action to reduce wasting and moderate malnutrition to take the science into the communities and make it happen in practice. So in summary, my hopes for your meeting are, number one, that you have a really good time working together and exchanging amongst yourselves, because that's the real virtue of the kinds of meetings that you've all come together on today. Secondly, that you learn ways to build the evidence base for effective prevention and treatment of moderate malnutrition in terms of science, programming and the building of national capacities. Thirdly, that you are able to locate these solutions within the political and economic realities of different countries so that they can be implemented within different contexts. And fourth, that in the end one of the outcomes of this work is that the capacity of countries to successfully address moderate malnutrition in their own unique fashion is increased. That's the style of the movement. That's what's happening so amazingly in nutrition these days. And thank you for the chance to talk to you. I hope that the words came across okay, and I look forward to any reactions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you, David. It was really great. Thank you very much. Given you are not here with us, this is the only opportunity for the participant to ask you a few questions. May I ask, please, those that they have questions to ask David to come here, down here to ask, please.
Then I can see you.
Yes, exactly.
Najat, thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope it wasn't too long. But I was kind of turned on doing it.
No, it was not long.
Thank you.
And I'm really happy to see that the strategy for capacity building of SAN is really the same as the IEA, learning from the others. And within a region, this is exactly what the IEA does, is sending people from a country to that have the capacity to use stable isotope techniques or nuclear techniques for nutrition to teach others and to exchange experiences. Questions? Yes, please. Can you come here?
And one other thing, Najat, if there are no if people don't have many questions now, if we could have a phone conversation later on in the meeting, if you feel like it, when if there are things that crop up, I could interact with you or with colleagues, if it works.
Yeah, I have two people coming, David.
Okay, cool.
Can you introduce yourself and come here?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'm Khurshid Talukdar, I'm a pediatrician from Bangladesh, and I'm very happy to be at this meeting to interact with colleagues from across the world on this very important issue. I just wanted to mention about the issue of the development of moderate malnutrition and how to prevent it. Because if we, as pediatricians, we find that looking at children when they come to us, often, they're dying even before they develop moderate malnutrition because of bad nutrition in terms of the feeding, that they have been exposed to. So, I'd like in this meeting to come back one step further back to the issue of preventing even moderate malnutrition, which is through the promotion of IYCF, good recommended IYCF practices, within which I think we need to have this discussion of moderate malnutrition, because our ultimate aim should be to stop moderate malnutrition developing in the first place. I think if you've detected a child with moderate malnutrition, it's too late. When we talk about growth monitoring, I'd rather use the term IYCF monitoring, because every time a child comes to a health worker, they should be asked, what are you feeding this child? Even before weighing the child. If a child is being fed according to recommended WHO IYCF recommendations, then I think you could stop wasting time weighing that child. You could just say, yes, go ahead, continue doing this. And you would save a lot of resources in the growth monitoring and promotion programs that we are undertaking. And so I have come here to this meeting, being very much an IYCF person and not that involved in CMAM, but I would like to have a sort of a closing of the silos, of IYCF and CMAM, and have a much more wider approach to the issue of malnutrition in children in our countries. Thank you very much. Thank you.
David, this is Ricardo Wawi. Great to hear from you again. I want you to reflect a bit in this process. How is this moving from the policies to the politics? Because the only way this becomes sustainable is this is taken up as a government responsibility to secure food and eradicate malnutrition in all its forms. And I'm saying this precisely because in Latin America over the last 40 or 50 years, we've had various levels of success in moving from the policies to the politics and making malnutrition unacceptable as a political demand.
Excellent. Can I comment on both Dr. Talukdar and Ricardo Uwai? Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah? Can you hear me? That's the most important thing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, to be to identify with what both of you have said, so I can't say it as well as either of you, my shift into what I'm trying to do at the moment is a reflection that when we encounter children who are malnourished in a health setting, it's always too late. I so agree with, I hope I got your name right, Ricardo, was it Dr. Talukdar who spoke before you?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to really identify with what he said when he pointed out that when a child is moderately malnourished, it's too late. And I would agree with that 100%. And so I am delighted when he says that he is fundamentally a practitioner of and an advocate for good infant and young child feeding practices. And I would say that I'm sure he would agree with me that this means also good nutrition for adolescent girls, very good nutrition, plus also protection during pregnancy, and of course, massively important, is help to enable women to breastfeed successfully, exclusively during the first 6 months, but to continue breastfeeding as they want to in later months. So difficult in so many societies. So I would say that how much I support the position, and I was delighted to hear it got a good clap, that infant and young child feeding is an absolutely critical step to this. I agree. Now, Ricardo, moving from policies to politics. So my dream is that malnutrition as an issue becomes a primary area of political concern for an increasing proportion of world leaders. And that's what, in a way, we've been trying to do with the movement for scaling up nutrition, is to create a much better space within which political leaders can articulate on the injustices associated with malnutrition and the importance of political action for nutrition, indeed for eradicating malnutrition in all its forms. I think your own work and the work of others in the community with whom I interacted in September last year in Granada has been absolutely critical in creating the science base from which good political action can happen. And I suppose I see the role of people like myself working within the United Nations system as trying to support this politicization of malnutrition and trying to get it into the right place. It does mean that life gets more difficult, because as soon as things are politicized, there are controversies that have to be addressed, but I think that's absolutely what we need to have. There needs to be very sometimes aggressive and acute controversy around aspects of malnutrition in order that it can be properly politicized, and I would like to agree with you that this must be part of the agenda, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and colleagues in the IUNS and in other spheres to help make this happen. I don't know whether you might have, Ricardo, some points to me about where you think we need to do more.
Maybe the example is that in many of the Latin American countries, it has been the technical people that have made the point, and then this has been taken up by the politicians. But to all politicians, this is not right and left and center.
Yeah.
This is across the political spectrum. And in a way, if you create a common movement that actually harnesses on anyone that wants power, to put in his priority that power includes responsibility to feeding infants in a way that they will not be malnourished. So I'm not advocating for under what political sign it's going to be done, but it must be done in a sustainable way by all. It may be the king in the case of Thailand, or the queen, or whatever, or it may be a social movement. But until it becomes that, and this is what's happened in Bolivia, in Brazil with Famacero, in Chile at an earlier time, and it's starting to happen also in Peru. So when there is a demand and under the democratic process, then you are able then to bring this and make it sustainable.
Totally agreed, everybody, and I think what's happening in the Sun movement in some countries is on the journey to get there, and don't hesitate to kind of keep giving us advice and guidance if you think there are ways that myself and others can help to speed up the politicization of malnutrition in the way that Ricardo just described. Thank you, Ricardo. Hello, Eileen.
Hi, David. How are you?
Very goodish.
I continue to hear enormous support for the Sun movement. And then related to that is questions about how do we keep the momentum going. And a lot of those questions, queries, come from very sincere people in sectors other than health. And the sense that Sun has allowed a focus both on direct nutrition interventions as well as nutrition sensitive. And I was recently in Uganda, for example, and continues to be a lot of hope that this expanded approach will have a much more dramatic and quicker. But then the question becomes, how do we get specific when we get beyond health sector? Agriculture, we have some ideas, but then you get into education, transportation. And I think there's enormous opportunity with these learning groups you talked about in Senegal to have countries share different models. It's not a cookie-cutter approach, but as models emerge which are non-traditional, innovative, getting that information out very quickly. And I wonder if you have a sense of I know the term was used, early risers, but if you have a sense of some cadre of countries that really have demonstrated it is not business as usual.
So out of the 52 in the movement at the moment, from my calculations, there are 20 that are showing real exciting progress. For me, the time when this progress needs to come out and really be appreciated and understood has got to be in November this year at the International Conference on Nutrition, because it's at that moment that hopefully the sort of official establishment will be able to really appreciate what is being achieved in sectors other than health, even in sectors other than health and agriculture, to contribute to nutrition. I think all the time of the work in Indonesia with the education sector, the Peru example that Ricardo just referred to is super important because of the results-based programming that is working in particular communities that have shown to be vulnerable to malnutrition. I do feel that in several of the countries that are present in the meeting today, in Vienna, there are examples. Namibia has got an awful lot going on that I believe can be talked about and demonstrated. Ditto with Haiti and Cote d'Ivoire. I'm delighted that Guatemala are present. They're another rising star in Southern America. Very, very pleased that Obey of Tanzania is with you because of the way in which in Tanzania, by increasing the number of personnel at district level, they've been able to get a lot of decentralized focus on malnutrition. And also Burkina Faso, together with other countries in West Africa, Francophone countries, all moving forward. It's sometimes, Eileen, difficult to, in a way, to share all the richness of what we're seeing in the different countries. People just don't believe the variety of approaches that are being followed. And that's why we have arranged that this year's Sun Global Gathering will be in Rome just before the International Conference on Nutrition, to try to provide a live space, a lively space as well, where all those who are interested to hear what countries are doing, different ways of working along the style you described, can try to appreciate it and can let it come into the mainstream of top-level thinking. And when I hear what you just said, that some people are wondering how it will be possible to sustain the momentum, I would just say it's in our hands. The great joy of watching what happened on HIV/AIDS over the last 25 years is to see that really it was led by communities and countries and not by top-level institutions. And I hope that from the point of view of the nutrition movement, that we will continue to see leadership coming from countries, from Uganda, where you've been doing such amazing work, from Nepal, where I know you've also been doing a lot of work, and from a vastly expanded community of actors. Eileen, what advice do you have to us, particularly as we're going into this big evaluation, for sustaining the impetus?
Yeah, and I am really a little reluctant to give you advice, David, because you're the master. But if we're going to use the ICN as a key platform, I would say evidence is important, but advocacy is key, and use that platform in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. I hope you'll be there.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. There are more questions, but we don't have time, so I'm sorry. Maybe, probably, and we will find another opportunity during the conference and send you the questions, people.
That's navarro@un.org. Easy email to remember.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Nadia, thank you very much indeed. Big hand to all of you in IEA.
Thank you.
We're all in it together. Thank you. Okay.
Wonderful. This is the end of the opening, but it's not finished yet. I have an announcement. Please, could anybody involved in session 1 tomorrow morning, chairs, rapporteurs, speakers, please meet at 8:15 morning at the briefing room, ground floor. Thank you. So we have a nice reception downstairs. The students of American International School in Vienna wanted to mark the occasion and sing for you. So please, could everybody make its way downstairs? Thank you very much.